Life is suffering. Our world is full of war, illness, hate, depression, and our personal lives are no different. It seems that every good time we have, a devastating blow is waiting for us just around the corner. And both ourselves and everyone around us seems to be struggling with some kind of mental turmoil. We are encouraged to combat this through chasing happiness by trying to fill our lives with as much pleasure and fun as we possibly can to escape the suffering, and most people do that. However, the brutal truth is, we are not suffering enough.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Yes. The key to a great, fulfilling life is suffering the right way, which is different from the way 99% of people suffer. So hear me out. As a teenager, I tried to avoid any forms of suffering, no matter how big or how small, through escaping, using pleasurable things such as video game porn. And while for the majority of my free time, I was able to do those dastardly deeds, occasionally I would have to help my stepdad working at the barn. And to be honest with you, I hated it because I found it so boring. It was mainly just cleaning horse stalls, i.e. scooping up poop and filling horse troughs with water. And while it was usually just for one day here and there was one time where me and my friend were driving a Ranger and it was my turn to drive, and I was driving too fast, I guess, and there was a bump and I wanted to turn and drift all epic, and I flipped the Ranger and nobody was hurt and the Ranger was fine. But nevertheless, my parents for some reason decided that, oh, you flipped the Ranger, that you're driving it for the first time and y'all are just having fun as kids. You're in trouble for a week. So for a week, I had to work on the land. And through my eyes at the time, I was suffering, not only because I was having to fill up water and scoop poo-poo, but because I was forgoing my games and my And I know what you're thinking and what I'm thinking too, looking back. That wasn't that big a deal. And not only that, but it was literally better for me to be outside in the sun, destimulated compared to at home, dopamine overload, being a degenerate.
I'm so good!
All these things I could have been doing to strengthen myself, develop myself, build my character, but instead, I was not only chasing cheap dopamine, but running into the arms of comfort and familiarity. Think about some of the biggest male motivational, inspirational figures online. Pretty much all of them are praised and respected for some form of suffering that they willingly put themselves through. And because of that, it granted them physical strength, mental strength, health, wealth, and more. As men, we are drawn to people like the David Goggins or the Jocko WIllink because of their suffering. We look up to them and strive to be like them because these are people who, one, handled suffering and adversity very well, and two, willingly leaned into it or chose to suffer compared to choosing to do something else comfortable and pleasurable. We attach to embracing suffering on both ends of the spectrum, from Jordan Peterson telling us to just clean your room, man, all the way to David Goggins, who ran 100 miles with broken feet while peeing blood. Biosphere 2 is essentially this mini version of our planet that is used by scientists to study organisms. And one of the craziest stories out of there is when they were studying trees and they were confused why when trees were growing, none of them were fully growing into maturity. They would fall over, they would die. And that is because the biosphere doesn't have wind. When there is no wind constantly pushing on and stressing the tree grows to be weak and doesn't survive for very long. As men, we have to suffer. Without the suffering, there is no development. You're watching me, I'm a self-development YouTuber. You want to improve yourself, you are going to have to suffer. Nietzsche said it best when he said, "The discipline of suffering, of great suffering. Do you not know that only this discipline has created all enhancements of man so far?" I mean, even in the Bible, the peak of the story of the Bible is Christ willingly undergoing horrific suffering. However, there are different kinds of suffering, and we need to understand the difference between unchosen and chosen suffering. Unchosen suffering is things that were brought onto us completely out of our control, such as the tragic death of a loved one, illness, injuries, accidents. Now, obviously, this is something we don't want to bring on more than we already get through life itself. This is not something we're going to pursue. However, when it does happen, I will explain later in the video how to deal with it. Versus chosen suffering, as the name implies, is things that we choose to endure. And everyone has forms of this. And when I understood this and I look back on my life, all of my development was through suffering. I'm sure a lot of you, like me, go to the gym and lift weights. We are willingly, consciously inflicting suffering onto ourselves in forms of fatigue, muscle tears, the burn, the inflammation, the soreness, because we know that along the line, we will be reaping rewards from it. We will be reaping development of our physiques and of our mind. The only reason I'm here today is because of suffering. I left the comfortable path of continuing to live at home, go to my cheap community college, work my super easy job at Academy Sports and Outdoors, to move into an apartment in a studio room, not even a full-size bedroom, with roaches in the ghetto, to chase my dreams, because I felt like the suffering, I knew that the suffering will be worth it, and that through the suffering and the development of myself, by forcing myself out of my comfort zone, moving across the state, would push me into something that I want to become. And that completely changed my life, and I will later explain how I'd actually use it as a tool to combat the bad forms of suffering. So obviously, I'm not saying we should just suffer all the time for our entire lives, because who wants a life just of endless turmoil and despair? However, there's a story from Alan Watts where he talks about a man who taught himself how to lucid dream, where he could essentially control his dream. He went to bed and had all the thrills, all the pleasure, all the fun he possibly could, because he can control reality. And then he did it again the next night, and then he did it again the next night. And he kept doing it, and it got boring. So he started instilling challenges in his dreams. He started instilling adversity. He probably started dreaming about going to war, fighting battles, conquering things, because he wanted that balance of suffering and reward. Without suffering, life is meaningless. We need the friction. We need the tension in the slingshot so that when we let go, it propels us forward. Now, before I go into how to suffer the right way and the different types of suffering, I need to tell you this. In reality, there is no escape from suffering. The only difference is if you continue to try to escape, run away, distract yourself, chase pleasures, you are just going to doom yourself to a life of mediocrity. All of us who are embracing suffering, doing the right kinds of things, are going to leave you behind. And you are still going to suffer, and it's going to be much worse than anything we will experience, because yours will be existential and brutal. I'm sure a lot of you can relate, but I've had these days where it's probably late in the day, in the afternoon, and I sit down and something about the day just didn't go my way. My plans didn't go the way I wanted to. I didn't get the work done I wanted to get done. And because I'm self-aware enough, I'll realize what I did wrong. Perhaps I indulged in distraction instead of checking off the things that needed to be checked off. And I'll just sit and watch the default mode network of my brain spaz out and throw all these self-doubts, despairs, stresses, anxieties onto me. And in these moments, you're just sitting there and observing this, and you feel anxious, you feel depressed. You start to wonder if you're really cut out for any of this. Now, luckily, I've trained myself. I'm able to detach from this and observe reality for what it really is. Realize that all these days stacking up, I've been making immense gains and progress. And that's only from one day. So imagine if you forgo the suffering, chase comfort, chase pleasure for years. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, your whole life. Imagine the suffering then. You have nothing to look back on. All those days led up to this. That suffering, that failure of life, that lack of fulfillment is much worse than any of the little discomforts I will lean into now. And the first thing we need to do is understand the difference between unconscious suffering and conscious suffering. Unconscious suffering is what 90% of people struggle with. And the worst part about this suffering is that it's not even real. This is the depression, anxiety, self-doubt, dealing with past trauma, all these mental downward spirals that a lot of people go down is forms of this unconscious suffering. The reason I call it unconscious, even though you're obviously awake and dealing with it, is because you're not being truly conscious or mindful about it. You are trapped in the default mode network of your brain, and all of this suffering is being brought upon you by yourself, your own ego. Think about it. If you're suffering from anxiety, you are stressing about the future, something that doesn't even exist yet, something that is not happening in reality, right now, in the present. When you are depressed because of something in the past, you are upset about something that no longer exists. It doesn't exist. It's not happening. It is all you are reacting to is a memory, a thought that is popping into your consciousness. When things happen in your day-to-day life that upset you, piss you off, anger you, frustrate you, upset you, this is all in the default mode network, the monkey mind. And for a lot of people, their brain will continue to pull them down a horrible path instead of leading them to a path of improvement. And the key to combating these forms of suffering, which almost always isn't beneficial because, like I explained, it isn't real. And it is to practice true stoicism by dropping back prospectively and observing these emotions, these temporary emotions that are not real as what they are. They are just appearances in consciousness, and they will pass if you just observe them, focus on them, not identify with them, pulled back perspective. Remember, they will pass. The reason why this is so harmful is because most people do not understand how to do that. These thoughts come in, anxieties, depressions come in, and they identify with them, and they will stay in that mind state for days, months, years, and that is where it becomes truly self-destructive. And notice how I'm saying you have to stay with these uncomfortable thoughts, stay with the suffering, and sit with it and truly observe it, truly fully be there, compared to most people's reactions, which is to band-aid it by escaping, by chasing pleasures, by distracting themselves so they don't have to face their own thoughts. And this is the frame of mind you will be in when you do your chosen suffering, because you are willingly leaning into the friction, because you know that the outcome is going to be good for you. It is going to develop you, even if it sucks and it's brutal in the moment, in the present. Also understand that stoicism, being able to observe thoughts, observe emotions, and attach to them, is a skill. It is a skill because you have to build up the mental muscles necessary to be able to do it better. The best practice for this is meditation. So if you're interested, I have a free 5-day guided meditation series. It's in the description below. Check it out. And when you do decide to start introducing more chosen suffering into your life, understand that you don't have to start by running 100 miles and breaking all the bones in your feet. It can start as simple as not even introducing anything new to your life and just cutting out some of the comforts, the distractions, the bad habits, the pleasures, because even just the absence of that is going to cause suffering within you. And the thing about this is I can give you plenty of examples like, oh, start to go to the gym, take cold showers here and there, force yourself to meditate, force yourself to read, force yourself to write, force yourself to go on a walk instead of watching TV. And if you want to even get more extreme, quit the job you hate to force yourself to learn how to do the skills that will get you into the business you want to do. Force yourself to go interact with a bunch of people despite your crippling social anxiety, because you know that you'll become good with people. And if it does mean you have to go out and run 100 miles and physically hurt yourself, break the feet in your bones like Goggins did, so be it. You will come out of it a better man. And you'll even add meaning to your life, because you will be adding meaning to your suffering. And like I said earlier, life is suffering. Consider checking me out on Instagram and Twitter. Don't forget about the 5-day guided meditation. It's free in the description below. And that's all I got for you. Dude, I was suffering making this video because it is late in the day and I'm mentally fried, and I'm going off an outline. I didn't even write the script out all the way, but I really want to get this video out. And the sun kept moving, so I kept having to change the camera settings and start over because the lights are changing. Now it's super dark in here.